Hello and welcome to part 2 of the Berkowicz of East Warsaw. Right, in part 1 we got to a certain degree of understanding, had broken 2 small gaps in our brick wall, but we were left with lots of unanswered questions. Who was the mysterious brother, Berkowicz? Why can't we find various different people in the Warsaw records? Harris and Cyril, Max or Isidore, Abraham and Losa, and why won't a whole load of American distant cousins speak to me to help me out with the research? So I was a bit confused about Losa. I'd got this record from a New York passenger list, and I was fairly sure that this was the mother of my great-grandfather and his 2 siblings. But no one had heard of the name Losa before, so I shared it with the JGSGB Facebook group and also with Tracing the Tribe. And from sharing it, lots of other people interpreted what's on the screen differently. Some people were adamant that it said Rose, not Losa. Others thought it said Laura. Quite a lot of support for Sora, which is basically a Sarah derivative, and I believe that one quite strongly. But whenever I mentioned Losa, no one had ever heard of that as a Polish female name. Never heard of it at all. No way, Jose. Oh, could even be Jose, but never mind. So Sora was the new hypothesis for what my great-great-grandmother's name was. The other mystery was Brother Berkowicz. I'd searched as much as I could by address in the 1910 census, could not find 222 East 199th Street, and so I asked for help again on the JGSGB Facebook group and on Tracing the Tribe Facebook group. There was lots of help. People looked at that particular street and proved to me that it was too short to have 222 on it. And eventually, after several weeks of puzzling, we zoomed in on the record, and the obvious conclusion, seems obvious now, was that the bottom line of the 99th Street was, in fact, from the previous, from the line below, and in fact, we should be looking on East 109th Street in New York. As soon as we did that, lo and behold, up popped Louis Berkowitz. He must have been the mysterious Berkowitz, but I was looking at the wrong address. So this is the 1910 census, and we get to see Louis with his wife, Luby, and daughter and son, Rose and Sam. They're in New York. Their ages are sort of late 20s for Louis and early 20s for Luby, and quite young children. They're Yiddish speakers, but quite interesting about Rose, mention of English nationality, although she was a Yiddish speaker, and only Sam had actually been born in New York. And it looks like the 3 of them came to the country in about 1907, and Louis was working at an ironworker factory. East 109th Street, number 222, is on the census, as you'd expect. That's exactly where we were looking once we'd got the 109 rather than 199 address. Because the daughter was born in the UK in 1907, I did actually send off for her birth certificate, and here it is. You get to see Louis and Lily Berkowitz, not quite Luby, mentioned here, and her maiden name of Shapiro is noted. I thought they might be staying with my great-grandparents at 4 Spectacle Alley in the East End of London, but they're actually staying at a different place, 4 Dudley Terrace. So I also looked in other censuses. This is the 1915 New York State Census, and you see the family group. 5 years later, it's growing a little bit bigger, so not just Rose and Samuel, but we've also got another daughter, Sylvia, and a sister-in-law, Ray Shapiro, is also staying here, so further confirmation of that Shapiro maiden name, and they're still at East 109 Street. Looks like they've moved down a few apartments, somewhere between 212 and 216. There's the Shapiro in her sister-in-law's name. 5 years later, 1920, again the census, they've moved, this time to Hampton, Massachusetts, Springfield City. Here's the family group, Louis and Lena. Again, a slightly changed name, but it is the same woman. And we see, in addition to Sylvia, we've had another son, Arthur. And they're living in Bond Street in a completely different state, away from New York City. And this time it says they probably came to the States in roughly 1908. And Louis is a gas fitter in his own shop. 5 years later, 1930, Federal Census, we see the family group. Again, looks like there are more children, although we've got Arthur at the bottom here. There is a continuation sheet with more children. And we get to see, you know, how some are born in New York, some in Massachusetts, and a child born in England, Rose, who we saw before, seems to have left. And Louis is now a plumber. They're on Algonquin Street, but still in Springfield City, Massachusetts. And here's the continuation, 2 more children, looks like George and Elsie, who've been added. So we see an ever-growing family for Louis and Lillian, as she's noted here. Finally, 1940 census, we get to see the group, and there's actually one more son being added after Elsie. This time it's Richard, and they're on Medford Street, still in Springfield, Massachusetts. Louis is a plumber, his own shop, and we get to see some of the other children being new workers and salesmen, so they're joining the workforce. Here's our summary of the census map. We see we've collected a good number of censuses and managed to find pretty much everyone. There are some work still to be done as the children left the house. I haven't actually got the censuses for those children, but it can be done. An exercise for the reader, the watcher, or work in progress for me. Managed to find Louis' passenger list, New York passenger list, as he was traveling into the country, and we get to see him traveling under the name Berkowicz, age 24, is down as an engineer, and guess which address he's come from, Gershon Berkowitz, his brother, 4 Spectacle Alley, Whitechapel in London East. So he's staying with my great-grandfather, and he's going to stay with a new name in the US, a brother-in-law, S. Stein. That was new to me. And Louis was born in Warsaw, as all the other brothers were. And the address that he's going to is 214 East 98th Street, New York. We'll note that later. Lily, she travelled a little bit later after Louis. And we get to see her travelling with her daughter Rose. For some reason had her name by mistake. It's been crossed out and Rose has been put there instead. And just travelling as an infant. But Lilia or Luby or Lillian, lots of different names for her, is 20 years old when she came to the States in the first place. Where did she come from? Her previous address, again, 4 Spectacle Alley, the address of my great-grandfather, but for some reason noted him down as a friend rather than brother-in-law, I guess. And she's going to stay with her husband and father, L. Berkowicz, which is Louis, and his address is 214 East 98th Street again. And she was actually born in Minsk, it seems. It's not this Warsaw reference, which is the person just above. And, yeah, 214 East 98th Street is where she's going to join her husband. So I wanted to find out who they were staying with and who this S. Stein was, and it was quite easy to find out because there was a birth record. You know, how was he a brother-in-law? Well, it turns out the simplest solution was he had married another Berkowitz sibling, this time a sister. Her name is Goldie, so we have Goldie Berkowicz-Stein and Samuel Stein, and this was found on a birth record in 1907 of someone called Celia. And I ordered the certificate from the New York Records, New York Archives, and again you see the same address, 214 East 98th Street, which proves it's all the right one. And so we're definitely talking about this Sam Stein married to Goldie Berkowitz. Managed to find lots of information about Sam Stein. Found him with Goldie and 3 children in the 1915 census. And this is what it looks like. That's a New Jersey state census. And there's Sam Goldie with 2 boys, Harry and David, and a daughter, Sadie, born in 1907. They're on Main Street, and Sam is down as a merchant. 5 years later, here's Sam Stein again with not a growing number of children, same children, Harry, David, and Sadie, with wife Goldie. This time they're on River Street, and they've moved to New Jersey in Passaic County. And look at their ages, you know, the children ranging between 12 and 18, Sam and Goldie both in their mid-30s, and it looks like they came to the country in about 1905. I should say they came with Harry and David. It was only Sadie who was born in New York. And if you look at what they do for a living, silk manufacturer in a silk mill. And Patterson in the Passaic County by the Passaic River in New Jersey was the center of silk weaving in the US. 5 years later, the 1925 census, we get to see Sam Stein with Goldie, Harry, David, and Sadie, but I think we've seen this before. If you look at who's living next door, there is brother Isidore Berkowitz with his wife Fanny, Philip, Samuel, and Hyman. We saw that when we were investigating Isidore. 5 years later, 1930 census, and now the children have flown the coop. We just see Sam and Goldie approaching 50. They're now on Governor Street, and still in Patterson City, in New Jersey, Passaic County, and he's still being a weaver in a silk mill. Finally, 1940 census. This time we see they've moved to join Sadie. She's now married and become Sadie Wellner, and the father-in-law and mother-in-law have moved in with them. They've actually moved to Barlow Street, number 2316, and that's in LA, California, so quite a change from having been in New Jersey for many years. He's still a weaver in a textile mill this time, so still working despite approaching 60. So here's our census map. Again, we see a fair number of censuses for the Steins. We probably should be able to find them in 1905 and 1910, but they have proved a little bit elusive. did seem to see them using false names, things like that. It was a bit strange. Anyway, I'll go into that in a bit more detail. Found lots of naturalization documents for Sam Stein, and found that his original name was actually Shmuel Eisenstein. He only used Sam Stein when he came to the US. Various letters about naturalization attempts that had been abandoned, and I get to see a nice picture of him on his declaration of intention, and also on the petition for naturalization. Lots of good genealogical information. Let's just pick some of it out. There's his signature, Shmuel Eisenstein, but we have the exact birth dates and locations for his two boys who were born in Warsaw, and also Sadie, who was born in New York. And we've seen this before. Sadie is actually the same person as Celia, which we use to work out exactly how Sam Stein was a brother-in-law of Louis Berkowicz. And yeah, just looking at that 24th of April 1907 date proves it all. Down there, passenger lists, here they are on the SS St. Louis. This is Goldie coming in, and she travelled as Sarah G. for Goldie Eisenstein with Gershon, or Harry, and David. Going to Patterson to stay with husband S. Eisenstein, and the address there is 25 Lawrence Street. Now, Sam Stein was actually very difficult to find on the passenger list despite having his naturalization documents because he travelled under a false name. Here he is on the SS Philadelphia, and he's travelled under the name Yankel Spinner. Age 28, he's a weaver, so that's consistent. And he says he's going to stay with his brother, and we can know it's him because of the address, 25 Lawrence Street, Patterson, which was the same address that his wife and two children were going to. So when we look at all these shipping records, I can just get this feeling of playing genealogical ping pong back in time, and a bit of a strange concept, but basically what you do is you start with one relative. So here we start with Isidore, and we see he goes to stay with brother Max. What does Max do? Max goes to stay with his brother Louis. What does Louis do? Louis goes to stay with his brother-in-law, Sam Stein. What does Sam do? Sam goes to stay with apparently his brother, W. Spinner, etc., etc. So this is how you go back in time, because pretty much when someone came to the US, they would stay with a relative or friend, and you can then do further research back in time until you get stuck. So let's revisit Max Berkowitz. If you remember from part one, Stacy wasn't speaking to me, but finally I got a message out of the blue, and it turned out that she's Max's granddaughter, as we thought, but she's not actually Theda's daughter, but it turned out she's Shirley Jean, the youngest of Max's daughters, child, with a husband called Sheldon Spindle, and she turned out to be a real treasure trove of information, loads of family photos, also my feet in the street in New York City. She lives in New Jersey, works in New York, and turned out to be my genealogical mentee and a real enthusiast for finding out information about her family. So here's some of Stacy's photos. This is Stacy with a cousin of mine called Donka. Here's Stacy getting married to Joseph Kadosh. And Joseph and Stacy and his daughter Emily. We've seen these before when we got some pictures from the Raiders. And here's Stacy with her father, Sheldon Spindle. Lots of pictures, not just the one we had of Shirley Jean in the top right-hand corner, but pictures of her graduating, going skiing, a very elegant picture, looks like on board some sort of cruise ship, and Stacy's favourite picture of her mother there. In terms of Theda, more than just that one picture in front of a posh car, and we did also have what seemed to be a marriage picture with her husband Ben Spira, but also pictures of her second marriage. These are the Street family. So her second husband was Hal Street, and her daughters, Theda's daughters, were Julia and Sylvia Street. And apparently they were in amateur dramatics. Here they are both acting together according to a local paper. And we get a more recent picture of the family, seem to be celebrating in front of a Hanukkah tree, so not quite sure whether they kept up their Judaism after all. The oldest of Max's children was Helen, and not just a picture top right, but we now have a nice picture of her in the snow in Brooklyn, and a picture of Al Rader, a bit better than the one we saw last time with Helen, and also with Shirley Jean on the right there. Apologies for the flesh on display, but here are the two boys we've touched on before, Craig and Neil, with Helen and Al Rader. And as well as pictures of Max's children, there are also some other pictures that Stacey didn't know much about. And here was a picture signed by a B. Berkowicz, and I recognized that immediately as my great-uncle Barney. So it was great to find some pictures of the English relatives, my relatives. This picture, I was very familiar with it, my mother and uncle. This was on my grandmother's dresser. Whenever I used to visit her, I saw it. So a very familiar picture of my Uncle Barry at 14 months and my mother at 7.5 years. There were some other historical pictures. There was a picture of Max and Sadie with the eldest child from, must be one of the earliest pictures we've got of Max. And also a mystery picture, 3 boys and someone else. So that was very interesting, and I wanted to find out exactly who that was. Other mystery pictures, one on the left here was noted down as Harry. We couldn't quite work out who that was. The one in the middle had no annotations at all, and the one on the right, it mentioned the address of the studio in Poland, Twara Street, and I happen to know that's where the Jewish synagogue is in Warsaw, so clearly that was a Polish address. Stacey also had a strong box with lots of different records that had been passed down her family. So there were some envelopes that showed various addresses and showed evidence of the name change from Berkowitz to Barclay. There was the location of the burial of one of Stacey's grandparents. We weren't quite sure if that was her grandfather Max or grandmother Sadie, but believed it was one or the other. There was a ketubah for her parents, Shirley Jean and Sheldon Spindle. And here's a bit more of the detail. I don't know if you read Hebrew or not, but if we just look at the interesting Hebrew name, Sosayenta is the Hebrew name of Shirley Jean. Other information about Max Berkowitz, some social security forms, information about him, his height and his weight, etc., etc. And finally, certificate of naturalization. This was very important because it allowed us to find the missing petition of naturalization and declaration of intention that we hadn't previously been able to find. Mention on this of some of the children, Helen and Theda, Shirley Jean, had not been born by the time the naturalization took place. One of the first things Stacey did was go and visit that address we found, and she found both Max and Sadie, or Sarah as we have here, and very emotional experience for her. First time she'd visited the cemetery, and I was in floods of tears as well, actually. I'm not that emotional, but if you read the Hebrew, Max is Mendel ben Reb Shmuel. Trouble was, oh my God, not Abraham. We were absolutely sure that these were brothers, and unfortunately the father's name was Shmuel, not Abraham. So having just been introduced to Stacey, I didn't want to suddenly say we're no longer cousins, but I decided to just put that one side and carry on investigating. So there's my floods of tears. Stacey then put in a record order for those naturalization documents, Max Berkowicz, and we already knew he'd travelled on the Majestic. We had found those records and got hold of his declaration of intention and his petition for naturalization. He's using a different name, Mendel, his Hebrew name, Berkowicz, also known as Max. He's a shoemaker, born in Poland, and the exact birth date in 1885. And he travelled on the Majestic, and his wife is Sadie. She was also born in Warsaw. She's still married to Sadie when the petition for naturalization comes about, but by this time you get to see the birth of Helen and Theda and their exact birth dates on this document. Finally, some signatures of Max Berkowicz. It's always nice to see a relative's original signature. So I decided to look in the Polish records again. Instead of looking for Max, this time look for Mendel. And lo and behold, there was one. Dates weren't quite right, but a little bit early, but here was a record, and we get to see child is Mendel, and the father is Yankel Berkowicz. So Mendel, the son of Yankel Berkowicz, not what we're looking for, not Shmuel or Abraham, so probably this is the wrong Polish record. Remember that picture we found, mystery picture with 3 boys and a gentleman in the middle? I was hoping against hope that this was Isidore. We hadn't got a picture of him yet, with 3 of his children, such as Philip, Sam, and Herman, the eldest 3. But when I shared it with my relatives, they said, "Don't be an idiot, that's Uncle Barney again, Uncle Sid." And actually my own grandfather's the youngest boy, and of course that is actually Gershon. I should have recognized him. I was just hoping it was the picture that I was missing. Anyway, never mind. Another nice picture of Gershon, and one that hadn't been seen by any of the my UK relatives. Now that we knew the father might be either Sam or Abraham, I actually started calling him Sam Abraham. A record appeared, and I'd been discounting it because the father was wrong, but the father was Samuel. So this was actually the marriage record of Isidore. And here is the record. We get to see Isidore marrying Fanny, maiden name Cohen, and the father is Sam. The mother is Shosha. Interesting name, a derivative of Sarah. And the maiden name for Isidore's mother was Gegor. So all very interesting. A lot of the names are starting to resonate here. If you remember, we had thought her name was Sora, or a derivative of Sarah, but now we also have Shosha, and there was Sosayenta as in the Randolph, I think. And Shosha is a very well-known name, such as the title of Isaac Bashevis' Singer's novel. So very interesting. And I think we have a new name for my great-great-grandmother. Let's revisit Louis Berkowitz. Took me a while to find this, but looks like there'd been a name change, quite a subtle one, Berkowitz rather than Berkowitz. Seems obvious, and a tree was found with some very nice pictures, and he had so many children that the perfect match of all of these children, Rose, Samuel, Sylvia, Arthur, George, Elsie, Richard, that was just too much, too unlikely to be a coincidence. This clearly must be the right family, and I get my picture of Louis and Lena or Lillian Shapiro. So I've been trying to contact Carolyn Dorman, but hadn't managed it. Remember that picture of Harry? I was just going by the little round glasses. possibly Harry is a similar name to Louis's middle name, and maybe at one point he was going by his middle name. Perhaps that picture is actually of brother Louis Berkowicz. We look at his tombstone, which I found on the same tree. We see his Hebrew name is Leib Herschel. Herschel is Harry, so a little bit more evidence for that. Also, one of the children, Arthur. Only reason I mention this is after I first gave this presentation, my mother said, "What about Arthur?" And it turns out that Arthur was one of the people who had visited the UK during the war, and so she was very familiar with this particular person, one of Louis' sons. Let's revisit Sam and Goldie. Remember the 1940 census where Sam and Goldie Stein are staying with daughter Judy and her husband, a couple of children there as well? Well, I took a look at this census and suddenly realized that Jerry was only age 3 in 1940, born in 1937, same age as my mother, just 80. These days people are living longer, and so I decided I should try and see if he's still alive, contact him. So I did a Google search for Jerry Walner, and up came a page of results, and at the bottom we get to see the officers of the Southern California Association of Violin Makers. I suddenly think that, yeah, we have violin players in our family, maybe that's the right one. Go to that page, here it is, and on the right hand side we get to see an email address for Jerry Walner. Send him an email. Hi Jerry, you don't know me, but etc., etc. Is he the right Jerry, related to Goldie Stein and Sam Stein? And within 30 minutes, he said, "Wow, you found me. I'm curious how you did it." And what then followed was sharing my email address to all of the people in the very large Stein family, and lots of people were interested in family history. There's a Beverly, there's a Vicky, Jeannie, all different parts of this family. And he also sent me the only missing piece of the naturalization documents, the certificate itself, for Sam Stein, a slightly more elegant looking picture of Sam Stein. And they sent me lots of trees, and here are some of the people. There's Jerry, Vicky I mentioned before. She was very important in the genealogical story. Terry and Beverly and Leslie, just a complete snowball. Estelle, Jerry's sister, Jeannie, a real snowball of emails sort of did the rounds, and suddenly we were all talking, finding out about this rather large family, all descended from Goldie and Sam Stein. Got sent more detailed family trees. You know, some of these go all the way to the present day. Youngest member, newest generation, Shaka, was only born in 2016, so nice and up to date. But the reason I said that Vicky was so important was that Vicky had been responsible for interviewing Sam Stein, aged 95, in 1976. And they made available to me very quickly 14 audio recordings from the horse's mouth, Sam Stein himself, talking about his family, his wife's family. It was absolutely amazing. So just to summarize some of these, you know, he was talking about his date of birth, name of his father, his mother, the fact that he'd been in the Russian army and he'd escaped, deserted, and Louis Berkowicz had helped him escape, fled Russia. So the fact that Louis Berkowicz was quite a revolutionary, this kind of explains why he was so hard to find and why he was using a false name. And most of them were from Warsaw, but some of the Steins were originally from a place called Machov. And lots of information about his grandfather, who died aged 96, started talking about his wife, Goldie and her family and brothers, Max and Louis, etc., etc. So I'm going to try and play one of these audio interviews about Goldie's brothers. If you'll bear with me, let me just click on this icon.
Let me go back to your wife Goldie then. Now, she had Max and Louis. Now, who is the oldest of Max? Louis the oldest child?
Yes.
And then who was next?
Max.
Wait a minute. And then there's one in London right now where he was when I was a girl. They called him Harris. Gershon.
That's Sadie speaking. Harrison Gerson's my great grandpa.
Louis, and then Max, and then Gershon.
Yes, in
Argentina. What was his name?
So I'm going to stop it there, but it's all a little confused, but absolute genealogical gems are included. Some of the information is incorrect. Apparently my great-grandfather was killed in World War II by one of those bombs. I know that not to be the case because he died of cancer of the esophagus, according to his death certificate, but all very interesting stuff. Apparently one sibling, perhaps Fradel, had gone to Argentina. A little bit of confusion, but you know, all from the voice, from the mouth of Sam Stone himself. So the lady who spoke first was Vicky giving the interview, and Sadie, Sam's daughter, was chipping in and translating things into Yiddish for him as well. So two other important parts of a later tape were about Goldie's mother, Shosha. Sam knew her personally, you know, obviously she was at the wedding. And not only was her name Shosha, as we'd come to conclude, but she'd actually come to the US, which I was completely unaware of. I always imagined she must have died in Poland. Shmuel, Shosha's husband, my great-great-grandfather, had died in Warsaw. He'd accidentally cut off his thumb. He was a butcher of some sort, and the infection spread to his arm and then to the rest of his body. So all very interesting, lots of first-hand testimony about what it was like to travel to the US, how seasick you are on the boat, talking about going to Patterson, etc., etc. So, yeah, wonderful information, but probably the most important thing is if I ever had any doubt that Harrison, or Gershon, his Hebrew name, my great-grandfather was one of the siblings, this absolutely proved to me first-hand evidence that he was definitely one of Goldie's brothers. So, Terry Dunn was one of the other important people because she came to visit me in the UK, happened to be coming over on a holiday, and she delivered a wonderful information pack, not just the same audio recordings again on CD or DVD, but also lots of other things, pictures and stories. Also met up with Leslie Fisher and her husband Alan, who very kindly bought me tea at their London hotel. They were just visiting on holiday. And what they brought with them were wonderful pictures. So here are Sam and Goldie with their 3 children. Here are the children growing up. We have David and his wife Betty. We have Sadie grown up. And we have Harry and his wife Charlotte. Them in much later life with you know, the 3 children and their spouses. Pictures of Sam and Goldie in the 1950s as they're getting older. And also this is actually Sylvia and Jerry getting married, Jerry Wellner, who introduced us to all these people, along with Sam and Goldie Stein on the outside. Other pictures from Harry and Charlotte's 50th anniversary, and get to see all of the children gradually getting older as the pictures get more colorful, and more pictures of other parts of the family, including Sylvia and Jerry Wellner again, with Jerry having a little bit less hair, And I was also introduced to Beverly, who again was a treasure trove of lots of pictures going through the ages of herself and her sister, the daughters of Harry Stein, and it trickles through to more recent generations as I get introduced to lots of other parts of the family. Vicky is the one in the middle in bright orange who was responsible for the audio interviews that I'm so grateful for, and Craig and Mead, other siblings of Terry, who we met before and I met. They brought with them more than just pictures, but also trees and taking back both the Steins and pictures of all the Berkowiczes, and very detailed trees with more dates and just circling some of the important people. This is Terry, who I met, Leslie Fisher and her husband Alan Fisher, who I met in London, and some wonderful stories as well. So as well as the audio interviews, there was actually Sadie's reminiscences when she was in her 90s, and these tell us about Shosha and Shmuel, for example. So let me read some of those for you. All about Mama's mother, i.e. Shosha. So this is Goldie's mother. Mama was leaning forward at the table. She was excited about something. After years of trying to have a mother emigrate to this country, the Quaker system had just opened to allow her in. I was looking forward to meeting this remarkable relative of mine. Mama was talking. It would still take time. My grandfather, who I had never seen, had died from poisoning. Whilst working in a butcher shop, his tongue had been cut off by a meat cutting machine, and the cut festered until the whole arm was infected. The end came soon after. Joining her daughter in America was all she wanted now, and any misgivings were gone. All her children had already left the old homestead and were on their own. There's a story about how Shosha had been a very feisty businesswoman and how she'd managed to get a particular chandelier that she'd liked for a very low price. But there's also stories telling you about what goes on in Poland, the pogroms, the fear of government, and let me read some of that. In my grandmother's kitchen was a large brick fireplace. The wall surrounding it was made of bricks, one of which was a bit loose and was used as a hiding place for money and forbidden papers that the brothers would spread wherever they could for propaganda against the system and government. Every May 1st in Warsaw was a declaration of revolt. My grandmother's 2 sons were involved and part of it. Constantly worried, she would appeal to them to stay home for that one dangerous day and would promise to give them anything they wanted. They never did. That would be cowardly. The country was out to destroy them, and they would, until death, work against it. There was news of another pogrom in Warsaw. Mama and Papa had already seen a few of these atrocities before coming to America, and it shattered them to hear that it was still going on. It was common knowledge that the pogroms were sponsored by the government. Many relatives of Ma and Pa, and relatives of many of the people marching now, were still in Warsaw, Łódź, and surrounding cities. So you get a real feeling of the sort of, the angst of being around pogroms, and here it is, stories that have been heard from Shosha and Goldie and others at the time. So just putting faces to the names on these trees, we've seen pictures of Goldie and Sam, their 3 children and their spouses, the next generation, including Jerry and Estelle, and Jeannie and Beverly, who were very helpful in supplying me with lots of photos. And people start growing up, having children of their own, including Terry Dunn, who I met, and Leslie and Alan. And then children of Jeannie and Beverly, including Vicky, the next generation, probably about the same age as my children, or my daughter, I mean, age 21. And finally, Shaka, the child born just 1 year ago. So what we've managed to do is we had 3 family groups, but we've added to it Louis' family and also the Stein family right up to the present day. Even Fredel, we think, who may have gone to Argentina. We think that's a picture of her from that Polish studio. We haven't quite managed to link forward with Isidore's family, but we have seen some Berkowiczes on Facebook, we believe are descended. And we've done pretty well in because of Stacy coming to the modern day with Max's family. And finally, hidden in that information pack that was supplied to me very kindly by the staff, a picture of Shosha herself. This is my only picture of a great-great-grandparent in my entire family tree. Shosha Berkowicz. Her maiden name was probably Gegor, Stagiaire in Polish, or Gaia, I found some records. First and only picture of a great-great-grandparent, which is very pleasing. So that is the end of part 2. We started with a picture of Harris, added Max, still no picture of Isidore, unfortunately, picture of Louis, Goldie and Sam Stein, maybe even sibling Fredel. And finally, the icing on the cake is that picture of Shosha. So they're all siblings and children of Shosha and Shmuel Berkowicz. So what is left to do? We should now go back in time and find out more about Shosha and her ancestors. That is the topic of part 3. Thank you.
Leaving the conference,